Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. Do I sound good? You can hear me all right? So wherever you're joining from, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Big thank you to everyone for taking the time to join. I am Alia from Saraswati, and you can also introduce yourself. Please introduce yourself in the chat box. Name, organization, maybe country, and maybe contact email if you're comfortable. And when you do that, please make sure that you send it to everyone in the chat box. I'm waiting for your introduction in the chat because I saw Kak Suci Rahmadia is the first one to attend it. And she said hello before. And I don't know where you're from, Kak Suci. You can tell us you're from. You can introduce yourself in the chat box. While we're still waiting for other attendants. Hi, Kaita. Okay, so I am Alia from Saraswati. Welcome to our session from transactional to relational, a conversation on equitable funding practices in Indonesia. I know the title sounds quite serious. It's from transactional to relational, but really it's about something that we all can relate to. It's about relationship, right? Because let's be honest, whether it's with funders, with our partners, good relationship are all about trust, flexibility, communication, right? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So our discussion today comes from a new study. We had this study, a collaboration between Menjadi and Saraswati with support from Planet Indonesia. The study that we did involved 24 organizations in Indonesia who participated in surveys and 19 organizations who joined an in-depth interview consisting of funders, intermediaries, and CSOs from across Indonesia and beyond. So we explored their experiences working with each others. And here's just a little bit what the study found because we're going to explore this more. But many local groups still feel that funding relationship can be, transactional, like short cycles, rigid reporting, and not much room to lead. But some intermediaries are starting to do things differently, trying flexible, long-term funding, building genuine partnership, and sharing responsibility instead of just pushing deliverables. So before we dive in, there are some quick notes that I'm going to share to you. First, we really want this to be a safe learning space. So this is not a judging space, right? So please do not, so no blaming, no finger pointing, we just some honest reflection and curiosity. Furthermore, please keep in mind that these findings do not represent all donors, all intermediaries, or all CSOs in the world, not even in Indonesia. These findings only reflects the lived experience of those who participated. And of course, we would love to hear from you. So please feel free to share your questions in the Q&A box. So we have a Q&A box with the box with the question mark there. You can put your questions there, and we're going to answer whether it's in written or live. And if you have any thoughts, any reactions, or maybe you have a hot, spicy takes, you can also write it in the chat box. And please remember to make sure that the chat that you send is sent to everyone because we have another mark that's written for host and panelists. Please make sure that it's for everyone. So we would discuss some maybe in the Q&A session later. Now let's meet the amazing people who will guide into our conversation today. As our wonderful speaker, we have Pramasti Ayu Kusdinar or Dinar. Hi, Kak Dinar. Are you there, Kak Dinar?
Hello everyone.
Hello.
Good evening from Bengkulu.
Oh, Kadinar is in Bengkulu, is an island in Sumatera, Indonesia. Kadinar is a program and strategy manager at Akar Global Initiative. Kadinar has been with Akar for nearly a decade and is also a founding member. She serves as the Secretary of Aliansi Bumi Kita and has led National Coalition for Tenure Justice and Community Rights. Here with us also Daniel Wilcox. Hi, Daniel. You there?
Hello.
Hi, Daniel. So Daniel is a program manager at the Asian Species Action Partnership, ASAP, right? So Daniel supports local conservation partners across Southeast Asia through grants, leadership and development, and long-term organizational strengthening. We also have Malika Dreyfus. Hi, Malika. Is Malika there?
Hello, hello.
Hello. So Malika is a program manager at the Wilsdorf Foundation in Geneva. Malika works in the environmental division, supporting partners around the world with a background in coaching, adult education, and facilitation. Malika is passionate about collective transformation and sustainability. Then for sharing our key findings, we have Mark Frutema. Hi, Mark.
Yeah.
Hi, Mark. So Mark is a founder and executive director of Menjadi. Mark leads Menjadi strategy and fundraising work, supporting local conservation NGOs in Indonesia and Southeast Asia to strengthen their leadership and organizational system. Last but not least, as our moderator for today, we have Rati Pertiwi. Hello, Mbak Rati.
Hello.
Rati
Hi.
Pertiwi is a research lead at Saraswati. So Rati is a public health researcher with extensive experience across Indonesia and a PhD from the University of Melbourne. Her work centers on health equity, gender, and the intersection of human and environmental well-being. So that's our speakers and moderators. Without further ado, let's get started. Please join me in welcoming our moderator, Rati Pertiwi, to lead today's discussion. Over to you, Mbak Rati.
Thank you, Alia. Thank you for starting our conversation tonight, for us here. Hi again, everyone. I think before starting talking to our speakers, I want to invite Mark because we want to ground ourselves in the evidence behind today's theme, from transactional to relational. So yeah, I would like to invite you, Mark. The floor is yours to share the findings.
Sure. Thank you, Reti. I hope you can all share my screen. Let me know if you can see that.
I think it's still on progress. Yep. There we go.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Yeah, well, thank you very much. Happy to be here and happy to share a little bit and give, I guess, a little bit of the context to the conversation tonight. Rati, of course, for everybody here, Rati is also one of the co-authors of this work, along with Andrew, Lugas, and Alia. So this was a very collaborative piece of work between Menjadi, Saraswati, with support from Planet Indonesia. I think we'll just jump straight in. We just wanted to share, I think, 2, 3 key insights, and then set the stage from our panelists. But the main insights that came out of this work, which we found relevant to this discussion, is that it's undisputable that national and international intermediaries are very effective at distributing funding in Indonesia, but we heard and found that they are perpetuating this sort of power overframe with CSOs, which is creating a certain amount of tension and a bit of dissatisfaction between these different organizations, and that's primarily rooted in some of the more transactional approaches that intermediaries are taking and the kind of hierarchical nature of the relationships. Many CSOs that we spoke to reported feeling more like subcontractors and subgrantees to intermediaries, delivering somebody else's strategy, delivering somebody else's piece of work, as opposed to being supported with the funding and trusts to really deliver, what they know to be needed in those contexts where they're from, where they're based, where they're working. Ultimately, CSOs want to be recognized as equal partners rather than beneficiaries or subcontractors. And so I think part of this point is that while Indonesian intermediaries certainly are better positioned to regrant to Indonesian CSOs. The discussions we had through this work found that they're not necessarily more attentive to considerations around equity, justice, and community-centric approaches to regranting or philanthropy. I think what the conclusion we came to is really that, yeah, context and culture matters a lot, right? It's understanding local power dynamics, cultural nuance within and across Indonesia is really important to understand how to then ensure that equity is really maintained at every stage, every level of the partnership, right? From funder to intermediary to local or national grantee. Yeah, I think, you know, with so much interest and growing appetite for writing large checks to intermediaries, we see that, you know, we can observe that funders get quite excited when they meet organizations that have the infrastructure and capacity to accept and regrant large amounts of money. Ultimately, I think for us, what's more important is the sort of underlying practices and behaviors of those intermediaries. And that's more important than, you know, where an intermediary is from or where they're based. So really need to look at, you know, how they work, how they relate, how they engage in partnerships. And so I think the message there for funders is to really do your due diligence, you know, invest the time and energy into understanding their practices. Otherwise, you could potentially be perpetuating some inequitable systems and practices. The second, I think, key point is that there was interviewees pointed to a sort of a disconnect between the often described value adding and capacity building roles of intermediaries and what they were experiencing and seeing on the ground. So, you know, intermediaries are primarily seen as regranters, as financial supporters, or what was also mentioned in one of the interviewers was this idea of kind of donors above donors, right? So they see intermediaries and donors as indistinguishable, leading to a bit of confusion and a lack of clarity around the specific value adding or the additional value adding roles and functions of intermediary organizations. And I think that's important because there's this growing desire, I think, for intermediaries to play these value-adding roles. There was a report last year produced by called the Philanthropy Dialogues, I think funded by Oak Foundation, and which sort of typified different types of intermediaries. So you have, you know, the campaigner, convener, capacity enhancer, coalition builder, connector, field builder, financial supporter, and technical expert. Right. So this idea of financial support or regranting is just one of the many different functions that intermediaries can play. But our work, the research that we did here in Indonesia, pointed to the fact that there's perhaps a bit of a disconnect in that perceived or perhaps intended value-adding role. And so I think ultimately there's value in a lot more kind of transparency and clarity in terms of the roles that intermediaries do and don't play, particularly here in Indonesia, and that will help intermediaries really be able to sort of step into the full potential of their roles as network weavers, catalyzers, enablers, you know, value-adding partners. And finally, I think the last point is that there was a strong kind of call and hunger for intermediaries to really embrace more relational approaches that value the lived experiences and expertise of CSOs in Indonesia. I think there was a consistent theme across many of the interviews for a desire to sort of redistribute some of the power that comes with, you know, accepting and then regranting large amounts of funding. And that redistribution of power, what that looks like or means is, you know, being able to, for local subnational organizations to define their own strategies, define their own priorities, develop and define their own success metrics, and ensure that, you know, decision making around how funding is used, allocated, spent, reported on, also includes those closest to the work. And so that's also where the title of this report came from. You know, it's this idea of looking at the practices surrounding regranting and intermediaries along the spectrum of sort of transactional to relational, and ultimately what the discussions that were had for this report pointed to was a real strong desire to sort of move more in direction of relational approaches, one that's more collaborative as opposed to hierarchical, you know, something that's grounded more in power with rather than power over, more community centric rather than donor centric, and much more, what you would expect and hope to see in true equal partnerships. So we drew on all of that work and the conversations that were had to try and put together some guiding principles. And we really wanted to produce something that was quite practical rather than more theoretical, conceptual, that would just look pretty but not really offer anybody any value. So we developed these guiding principles, and for each of the sort of sub principles, there are specific kind of concrete recommendations that we identified. And our aspiration really with this was to produce something that could help intermediaries self-assess and self-reflect, have some conversations internally about their own practices, but also to produce something that local CSOs could use to, reflect on their relationships with intermediaries and perhaps even identify the intermediaries that were best suited to them and their needs. And then finally, also something that could enable sort of top-down accountability from donors to intermediaries, where there was so the idea behind these kind of guiding principles and some of the recommendations within it was to sort of enable kind of greater critical reflection and discussion around what we would hope and expect to see in regards to the practices of intermediaries. I think what we've learned since then is that it's very much not black and white. A lot of things can sort of sit somewhere along the spectrum of transactional to relational, and even within certain organizations, people might disagree in terms of where they sit with regards to specific practices. But I would encourage everybody to have a look through those recommendations, because there are a few very kind of tangible things that I think are good starting points for thinking about. I'll just outline a few just as a sort of as a bit of a an example of where there's some tangible practical recommendations there. Things like, ensuring that the same overhead cost rates are applied to everybody. So if, intermediate organization is using a 20 or 25% overhead cost allocation, then, all organizations that they're subgranting or regranting to are able to use those same rates. Ensuring that funding is proportional, right? So that just because intermediate organizations may be larger and have more staff doesn't necessarily mean they should retain the largest proportion of a grant that is to also be regranted, right? If organizations at the community level are doing the bulk of the work, maybe proportionality there needs to be factored in. Certain things like ensuring equal contractual terms and rights. Often subgrant agreements are very skewed towards the granting party, so that wouldn't allow the subgranting party to even terminate the agreement. So things like, looking at contracts and the different clauses within it to ensure that that also reflects the spirit of, equal partnership and trust and relationality is important. And yeah, I think, showcasing partners, ensuring that credit is given where credit is due, and making sure that organizations aren't claiming work as their own, and really for intermediaries to really use their platforms and their reach to help elevate the organizations that they're regranting to. I think those are also some other concrete recommendations. I'll just stop there. I think that's probably enough from me, Rati. And I think we'll hear a lot more from the different speakers that we have tonight. So hopefully that gives a bit of a good foundation for the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for sharing all those important insights with us. So yeah, as Mark mentioned, now we are going to move into our panel discussions to hear reflections actually from our speakers. And here, Alia already introduced us, Dinar representing a local CSO, and Daniel from an intermediary organizations, and we also have Malika from the donor side. And I think as we go through, I invite everyone, like all the speakers, to respond not only to my questions, but also to each other, because this is a space to open reflection and dialogue as well. And then for those joining us, the participants or audience, please feel free to post your questions or reflections anytime in the Q&A chat box. We'll be keeping an eye on it, and I will bring some of your questions to our speakers later in the session. Cool. So let's begin with the first question for all panelists here. Yeah, probably from Daniel, Malika, and Dinar, up to you who want to answer first. Did anything from the findings that Mark said, or if you already read the reports, surprise you or make you reflect differently about your work? Who want to answer first?
I think I'm gonna first.
Yeah, Dinar, please.
So, Mbak Rati and Mark and my friend from Planet Indonesia and Saraswati and everyone who coming here tonight. I did a deep reflection about this circular discussion among us about this transactional and relational between donors, partners, intermediaries, and communities. And but the finding it's not really surprised me because the finding also come from my experience and our experience in my organization. So it's not really surprising, but um, for a long time, I always thinking that um, our our relationship between NGO and intermediaries and donor really belongs to and above to power over. Like I sometimes I'm really upset with my partners who are donors and intermediaries that they just see seeing us as a commodities, not not as a friends. So we thinking that we have to become their suppliers of their data, their work, their output, and they always seeing us just as number. So it's quite disappointed feeling that um, I, I I I ever felt about this kind of ecosystem. So that's the reflection. But I like 1 week ago I write my article. I write an article about my experience working with a lot of type of partners that occur in my organization work. I think I also don't want to become like really depend on the others like donors and then the intermediaries. And I also see in your finding, Mark, that a lot of donor also don't want to really depend and um, to us. Yeah, so they also want to see the local CSO and community in frontline also become more independent after they support us. So that's that's the point that I learned by your study in Indonesia. So I think that's my point.
Thank you, Dinar. I have a lot of follow-up questions for that, but let's hear from perhaps Malika first about, is there any surprising findings from the research for you?
Thank you. Yeah, what was surprising to me is I mainly work with intermediaries outside of Indonesia and or global, and I think those findings apply in all contexts. It's really interesting how this goes beyond one specific geography or context. And then I think the other thing that stayed with me is really this concept of power over and how intermediaries perpetuate that. And it just makes me think of more social issues where when we perpetuate domination mechanisms, often it's that we suffer from more structural issues. Or so I'm just thinking that's very interesting. Like, and what I mean is that often if I am being, let's say, dominated by a system, I am more likely to do it to others than if I'm not. So I'm just self-reflecting as donors, how are we representing the system? And so how important it is that we shift so that it can ripple further. So it's kind of confirming that reflection. that's it for me.
Yeah, thank you, Malika. I would love to hear more about your experience on the shifting, but probably that's for later questions. Let's hear first from Daniel here. So yeah, did anything from the findings surprise you? Probably like elaborate a little bit on maybe something made you think about your organization's own practice or assumptions after listening to Mark's key insights as well as reading the reports probably. Please, Daniel.
Thank you. I don't think anything necessarily surprised me, but as Mark was suggesting, it became a very useful framework for applying as a form of self-assessment to how we function and how we interact with the organisations that we support. And as Malik was saying, it's not just Indonesia. This can be applied in any context where there is that intermediary relationship. I would say that I should have mentioned we also used it not just for a self-assessment, we also used it as a framework for then going to our grantees and the organisations we support as a way of, as a framework for an anonymous survey. And that also produced a lot of interesting and in many cases reassuring answers that we're on the right tracks in terms of how we are supporting them and the flexibility we're showing. But I would say the one thing it did bring up that is part of our strategy, but did make me think, we need to really make sure that this is explicit and we're working towards it, is that we want a situation, ASAP wants a situation, I think many people on this webinar want a situation in which the role of intermediaries is diminished in some way, it's reduced. And I think the problem we've seen in other countries where this relationship exists and where there's a lot of power in the intermediary and power over the grantee is because the intermediary wants to maintain the status quo. And I think intermediaries should be wanting to evolve in terms of what they do and how they respond and how they support organizations. And it's really important that there's a pathway for achieving that. And I'm confident ASAP is on that pathway, but it did cause a moment of reflection, self-reflection, to think we've got to make sure that we're on that.
Thank you, Daniel. That's so interesting. So probably before going to Dinar or Malika again, can I just have like a quick follow-up from your reflections? Just like a little bit of example maybe on the practice where you shift your approach and how, if you could share, that makes like a difference for your partners.
Pose that question to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yes,
sorry.
okay.
You go like 2 in a row.
Well, some of it, so as Mark was suggesting, some of it is, some of those recommendations are very practical. So although we haven't actioned all of it yet, once we'd finished going through the self-assessment, we basically bucketed it to things that we are doing well, things that can be done immediately. It doesn't require any resources. It's just a small tweak here and there. Things that we could do better if we had the resources. And then I think there are things that are more reflective of this sort of broader environment in which we're working in that aren't necessarily within our control to change, but clearly there needs to be a bit of a movement, and this call is part of that, I hope, to making these things change, and ASAP should be part of that. And in terms of a specific change that I think is relevant here, when we developed our multi-year fund, which we call a continuation fund, it had a component in it that was linked to organizational development. But it was, on reflection, it was too prescriptive, and it was just, another form for people to fill in. It had too much of the jargon associated with organizational development, and so we completely changed our approach, and it then became much more about having a conversation with the partners, just working out what they need. And I think that speaks much more to this need to have a more relational approach to how you speak to and operate with and work with partners that you're trying to support, because many people, when they're confronted with jargon and they're working in a second language, they don't have the confidence to really express or articulate what they want, and having that conversation allowed that to flourish. And inevitably what they put forward was organizational development, so everyone in a sense was happy. they were getting the support they wanted, and we were sort of supporting something that we felt the organisation also needed to be sustainable. So I think that's a concrete example I can give.
Thank you, Daniel. That's really interesting, and that's like a super practical example. Thank you for sharing. And I might just go back to Dinar here, because we also want to hear we have like some findings on the experiences of local CSOs in Indonesia working with intermediaries. And maybe if you can just, like explain to all of us or share about your experience, what kind of added value have intermediaries brought to your work, before we go to like the next point from Daniel on how like at some point intermediaries also want to diminish their role, and then just like encourage local CSOs to graduate from intermediaries so they can have like access directly to donors. But before that, what kind of added value intermediaries like brought to your organizations in your experience, Dinar?
Yeah, I think in your finding, you also have a lot of point about how the good relation between intermediaries and CSO in Indonesia have 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 it. Yeah, so I think like, yes, we want have like flexible donors, and we want to also get more long project with our donors and intermediary, and also we want to get direct fund from the donor itself. But I really um, don't want to fragment that kind of support system for our communities. But I have like a table of reflection, because like a lot of like several months ago, I have lots of discussion about this topic, and I think that a lot of based on our experience, our partners have a lot of different functions and different responsibility to help indigenous people and local community um, get more stronger. Yeah. So I have. Can I share
Yes,
my point in here?
please. And again, I encourage all audience to also like ask questions from Q&A chat box. We are going to read your questions later.
Mm-hmm.
Dinar.
So Mbak Rati and everyone, so I try to do reflection with my friends in Akar Global Initiative, because we almost reach 20 years of working with indigenous community and local communities in here. So we see that lots of our partners working have a function like arrangement, amplifier, decider, and supplier. And the rules are who are arrangement, they are connector between movement. So in our case, like indigenous people and indigenous community can linking with the labor movement and also the women movement in national level. They also become like help us to strengthening movement capacity, and they also strengthening the advocacy and influence the key stakeholder in every level, and also they help us to doing like strategic litigation and legal aids for our community. And then those who amplifier is production of information, narrative, discourse, and knowledge, and also help us to compile the policy advocacy. So they must be journalists and academics and also researchers. And the third is decider. So decider, it's we can say it because we also working with the government in here in Bengkulu. So because we also do like advocacy activity, so we have to engage with local government in here and working building and shaping the good relationship with them, because the advocacy topic, it's really depend on their political will. So that's the decider. And then the supplier, it's about the source of mobilization. So this is role of our friend in donors or intermediary. So this is my reflection to our experience with lots of kind of partners that we work for more than 17 years. So that's our experience working lots of institution and partners. So if you ask me about the added value, I just want to ask our partners who are donors and also intermediaries, please respect our value as NGO or GSO in here. We also have our like special value, and we also have like different approaches to our community. So respect is meaning to they have to acknowledge our our experience working with communities.
Thank you so much, Dinar. Please, Malika and Daniel, if you have like any comments or reflections on like what Dinar just said, or vice versa, Dinar, if you have like any comments for Malika and Daniel, please just let us know. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's so interesting you put like intermediate organizations role in what was that, resource mobilization, right? Like not in other boxes in your table. And that's based on like 17 years experience working with your organization. Okay.
But I also don't want to make our partners who already support us for a long time. I don't want you to feel that your position only for this as a supplier for us, but it's not really important, because what kind of your support, it's really important to us, because just a little support, it's really mean to us, because we only like local NGO, we alone in here, and we have working with lots of community and with different interests. So just a little bit of your support, it's really mean to us. So and also want you to know that we are on the same ecosystem. So everyone who support indigenous community and local community also become a big and important supporter to their movement. Yeah.
Thank you, Dinar. I really like how you highlight the equal partnership relationship in your presentation. And yeah, like everyone who has like the same mission as well, or like vision to support indigenous community, then they're like allies. Thank you. Let me just go to Malika for next question. From the donor's perspective, what do you think makes a relational partnerships possible?
Thank you. So yeah, I mean, I'll share very much from our perspective. I am aware that there's as many perspectives as donors too. But yeah, I think something that really is helpful to create. So we have the wish to create that kind of relation. I think this is the first step, and once that is there, I think it's really about common transparency and self-awareness. So on both sides, I'm really seeing it on the partner's side, and on our side to be aware of what are limits or constraints which we may not have decided on, what are the areas we are really interested in, and so on. But that this discussion happens like equally on both sides of the partnerships, and that we can have those kind of open conversation. I think that starting with creating this kind of honest soil will enable the quality of the relationship, let's say with the intermediary, that then is necessary for them to kind of, again, I'm talking a lot about rippling it further to local organizations, but I think this is a challenge that came out of the report I can really relate to. It's like, as donors, what is our responsibility to give all the support, like challenge the intermediary, but also the good conditions so they can do their work in the best way. And it sometimes needs a little bit more push, but I think this is really important to get into this more relational partnership, sorry. And yeah, I was reflecting a little bit before, but the power dynamic is still here, and I think that we talk about relational partnership. We still need to acknowledge that the power relation is there because there's money and there's some that decide, some that and I think acknowledging that and looking at like what is the impact of it and having kind of honest conversation is really helpful. Now I'm also aware that these conversations are not always comfortable or easy to have. Not everybody likes to have them too. So take the time also to make people comfortable enough so that we can start having this conversation. And I'd say not just starting like upfront 10 first minutes. So I guess that as donors, we also need to make sure we are facilitating the space and the process for being local organizations or intermediaries to build this relationship, and not just taking as a, I do 1, 2, 3, and we have a relational partnership. So yeah, having a bit of a role of facilitator in that relationship building. That would be my statement.
But maybe like a really quick follow-up questions, Malika. Do you have like, I don't know, like, would you love to share any, like practical experience on how to build that, like relational partnership with your partners?
Yes. So, for instance, there's an intermediary with whom we work in West Africa, and I knew we were very aligned on kind of visions of impact and kind of mission, sharing the kind of same vision that we would like to contribute to. So it was kind of the perfect ally in a sense. And this organization is an intermediary organization. They are really all into relationship. Sorry, I don't get it right in English, but relational partnership. And they are questioning like power dynamics, wanting to really shift the way things are done. And still, it was very interesting because in it's like if our relationship, donor intermediary, was making all of that erase. They were suddenly behaving very shy and I knew why. It's very obvious. There's a lot to stake, a lot of money in game, and so on. And so it was really about how can I, recognize that this is coming up and give all the good naming it with them. So you ask concrete, practical thing. It's really like taking the time to have those discussions, like naming it and I think little by little, really encouraging them to, you can take the space, you can propose. We actually really hope that for you. And even if they preach a lot of flexibility and so on, when I was giving it to them, they were falling back into, the kind of more transactional way, because there's a lot of donors out there that are expecting that. So it was very interesting to see that. And it was an interesting experience because I realized it's not only, it's the responsibility is everybody can do something to change how things are doing. It's not only the donor, only the local organization, the intermediary, or any other stakeholders. It's like there's a new kind of relationship, like a new narrative about what is the relationship that needs to be built, and that is everybody. So I don't know if that was practical enough, but I have other practical example I can share at later stage.
That's a really good answer. Yeah. I got the idea. That's really interesting. I'm also like reflecting on that power dynamic you kept mentioning, because I think that's also like came up in our research findings as well, how like this power dynamic happens, of course, like in every layer. But maybe this is for Daniel, like like we, as Malika mentioned, we want everyone, you want like everyone to be equal, to be listened, but also the power dynamic. And sometimes like for example, local CS also feels that like they don't have like safe space to voice their ideas, or like to voice their things, like their ideas with donors and intermediaries, because they are afraid of losing support, for example. Now, Daniel, from your perspectives, how do you see like your role, and how are you trying to strengthen these trust-based relationships with your partners, considering like all those power dynamics that we are discussing here?
Yes, a very difficult and very important question. I mean, the issue around power dynamics, I suppose as Malika said, it's about being conscious and aware that exists. And I suspect as long as there's money involved, it's always going to exist to some level. And it's how you mitigate it as best as possible. And I think from ASAP's perspective, for example, we work very closely with Menjadi, with some of our partners in organizational development, and there's been a conscious decision that we will not be present in those meetings, even though we see ourselves as a good intermediary. I hope we have made a decision we will not be there because of the potential influence it has. No matter how much we might try and mitigate it when we're in the room, that dynamic is always going to be present. So I think very sort of practical, in some ways very sort of black and white decisions like that should certainly be part of the way that intermediaries and donors approach some situations. And sorry, what was the rest of your question?
That was about like how you navigate all those power dynamics, because it's like probably inevitably, as Malika mentioned, you should sometimes you provide like safe. My cat is like really interested in this topic. You provide like safe space, but then the like probably the local CSO still feel reluctant to share their ideas, because like the power dynamics exist. So in your role, like you as an intermediary organizations, how you navigate that to strengthen like trust-based relationships with your
I think,
partners?
yeah, so in terms of practical ways, it's certainly about creating that safe space, and in fact basically removing yourself from that space physically. And I think in terms of building a trust-based relationship, empathy is incredibly important to that relationship, and empathy comes from some level of shared understanding of the context in which that individual or that organization is working in. And I think from ASAP's perspective, having people in the team that have experience working for all manner of NGOs, including in Southeast Asia and other parts of the world, has been integral to making sure that we don't make the same mistakes that other intermediaries do, that there is that level of empathy and understanding of the context in which these NGOs are trying to deliver conservation in. And I think that's been a very important sort of element of how ASAP is structured. That's enabled it to work well with local CSOs. And in the Indonesia context, although it seems a very obvious thing to do, hiring somebody that was Indonesian, could speak Bahasa, dramatically improved our ability to work with some very, very small grassroots NGOs who we may have struggled to work with without that person in that role, because it's not just the language, it's also the political and social context that people work in, and it's quite difficult to acquire that as as a foreigner like me. It really has to be somebody Indonesian to understand all those complexities that exist across a country that's as diverse as Indonesia.
Yep. Thank you, Daniel. That's really interesting. Though, yeah, that's really interesting that, like all areas in Indonesia, it's diverse and unique as well. Like you cannot even compare like one province to another. But yeah, thank you. That's really good practical answer. So yeah, any thought reflections from Malika, Dinar, please, or Daniel as well?
I have a question for Dina.
Oh yeah, please.
So I think you mentioned that you've worked or you've been a founder of that organization for 17 years. Is that right? So that organization, ACAR, and you've been involved with 17 years.
Yeah.
And that table you produced is really interesting. But I wondered if you were to do that in year one, would those relationships be the same? Would you have categorized those different partners in the same way?
Yeah, I think now, because I grew in this organization for 9 years, and my organization almost reached 20 years old. And I can say now, every CSO and NGO in Indonesia grew on the competition to get more and lots of funding for as their supporter. And I can say if I like you say 1 year by now, I can see that I think I can mapping their same as my table that I present to you guys, because now in Indonesia we are in NGO and social movement in Indonesia really fragmented to specific issue. Like if you work for indigenous people, so indigenous people working alone, and if you work with women movement, the woman movement also working alone, and if you work with a labor movement and the labor movement also working alone. So we are not really connecting actually in Indonesia, because lots of policy in national level really um, means to fragmented us, not as like consolidate movement. So I think if you ask like that, I think yeah, I think we now still can mapping our partner by their function, like what I showed to my presentation to you.
But particularly the role of an intermediary, would it be the same in, say, year one of an organization's life versus year 17 of an organization's life?
Yeah, I think yeah, I can see they're still on the supplier. I mean, like the resource mobilization, because when I was really young at my organization, let's say like the begin my first years in ACAR, I can see that the donors, it's really I just see them as the supplier. I mean, like support only for money. They only shifting the money. But I also say to my friends now, a lot of type of intermediary in Indonesia not really do the power shifting, but only shifting the money to local NGO and indigenous peoples, and also local community organization. So yeah, I can say yes. And the new one, it's in Indonesia, our government also become intermediaries, because they collected lots of money for in their ministry, and then they they have to invite the intermediaries in Indonesia to become to to have like competition, really strict competition between intermediaries in Indonesia, and then we have to prove that the intermediaries have capabilities like administration capabilities to prove that they can get the money from our government as the intermediaries. So that's also the new condition of our situation in here, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel. Dinar, I think this is like a really, I don't know, interesting discussions that we cannot finish today, because I feel like that's really reflective questions that Daniel you asked about support, or like support from intermediaries, so whether it's going to be the same or different for 1-year-old organizations, or like 20 years old organization. That's probably a question that we couldn't get the answer at this time, but would love to continue this discussion actually, like again, probably, hopefully this is not the last one. So yeah, before we go to the questions from audience, any questions or comments from, Dinar, please, Malika, Daniel, if you have like one more for each other.
Maybe I can reflect upon. I have the impression that as donors, I mean, acknowledging that all donors have very different ways of working and possibilities, I think, and that an intermediary is very often funded by many different donors. I've seen that for intermediaries, it's also a struggle to manage all the donors' expectations. So even if they would like to be more flexible, sometimes they deal with very strict requirements, and it makes it quite schizophrenic for them to find a way forward. So we have tried with one of our intermediary partner. What we've done, and it worked quite well, we gave them one specific grant that they could use very flexibly, and so they created one funding modality that was kind of unrestricted, multi-year kind of funding. And they were able to do that within the bigger frame of having other funders more strict. And they could, with that, build a case and also show their other donors that it was actually impactful and it could work. And I think that maybe on the longer term, that will help them convince also other donors that lowering their requirements in terms of reporting and others, so that they have more leeway to do that. And so I guess as a donor, we also have a role to play with other donors to kind of advocate for that shift, and also just continuously not thinking that our way is the good way and that we found all the answer and this is the way, but kind of keep a critical mindset to ourselves and make sure we define ourselves as quite progressive as donors, but I'm sure we have some blind spots that we are not seeing. So how do we make sure we are always looking at that and making sure we don't just take things for granted in a way or another.
Thank you, Malika. I think that's like a really good conclusion or like summary,
Yeah.
because like intermediaries, it's like in between local CSOs and also donor, because I think it was also like a questions on that as well, like from intermediaries perspective, why they applied more restrictive approaches in managing sub-grants and sub-grantees. And then I think, Malika, you answered a bit of that. Probably that's because also like donor restrictions. And then what you just said is like to do something within your control or your power as donor, as intermediaries and local CSO, to shift into like more relational approaches. Dinar, you seem like you want to say something.
Yeah, actually, that's my question to you, Malika. I really wonder, because based on my experience, I have like a big unconfident and uncomfortable moment with our um, partners. We can say that they are like national intermediaries and in here. So they're more like they're building a consortium between us, and they become a host of this consortium. But how they treat us, it's really just like a number. So they already have the donors, the money, and they also already have the goals, they also have the objective, the outcome. But when they back the consortium, they only like become dictate our work and not really respectful for with our condition in here. So they really um, just just looking for partners to shifting their money. So in your perspective or in your experience, do you ever um, check the details of with the community who are beneficiaries, not the intermediaries that you support, about the problem that they have? Because in my experience, we don't have the like the structure to complain to the donors that support our consortium. So I really wonder about that things.
That's a really good point. I think that this is also, I mean, so I would say that, this intermediary has a vision that's extremely transactional, like using local organization as implementers. And I guess that this is a way of working. And, if we were to look for like funding an intermediary, this is something that we would check, what is their vision about their own role as intermediary, how do they perceive local organizations. So really investigating, and so that would be speaking with them to understand their vision. And I think quite quickly we would see, okay, they want, or they see themselves having that role. And then I do know that it's very difficult for local organizations to kind of reach us to kind of complain and so on. What we try to do is to proactively, and so it's part of our due diligence. We've built a big network in the regions where we partner with intermediaries. So we will proactively go and seek the opinion of those local partners, and of course we'll never be able to speak to all of them. So, but we do make sure that in our due diligence we collect as many different voices as possible, to have honest feedback. And now whereas the local organization feels safe enough to be honest with us, I know that sometimes it's not easy also for them to be fully open. And we've been creative on finding the right person that can introduce us to their local organization, so they know that it's a trusted way of communicating and managing to get the right feedback. But this is totally something that we do. Now I think you're putting the finger on something interesting. There is no official channel of communication between local organizations and like final funders to feedback. So everything is kind of, or at least that I know, maybe I don't know that many like that. Everything is kind of filtered through the intermediaries, so it makes it maybe difficult to give also constructive feedback when things aren't happening as it should. I don't know if I answered your question, but
Yeah, it's really important to us to know how to figure it out, because I think in local in with our community that we work, we really need the channels to get more access, get direct access to donors. Not always mean to we want to get the money, but we want to have like fair communication and more open to to show that if you want trust, we have to work by evidence. If you want to work, if you want to see accountability, we have to that the due diligence that also allow us to reach out with your your donor with yeah.
I think that's something interesting and creative to be
Yeah,
investigated
I
further on
hope
that.
so.
Actually, that's also like one of the questions from the audience on about like why there is still no direct channel from donor to local CSOs. But I think you both already answered that question indirectly.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Daniel, do you want to add on that channel between donors and local CSOs, or probably like as an intermediaries, you like, I don't know, like from your experience, is there like any experience on facilitating local CSOs to speak directly to their donors, or
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think an intermediary's role should, I mean, an intermediary should want to evolve their role. They should want it to change. And perhaps it's overly simplistic, but there are clearly good intermediaries out there, and there are bad ones, just as Dina described, where they are very invested in just maintaining the status quo and having this very contractual relationship, but not just contractual. It's really abusing a system. To be honest, it's abusing the access and the resources that local NGOs often have, that an intermediary might not. And I think in terms of bridging that gap between local CSOs and donors, the organizations that we're working with at the moment, they're very, very young, which is why I was interested in Dina's perspective about how her organization has grown and whether the role she had with an intermediary might be different in year 1 to what it is in year 17, because for some of the organizations we support now, we definitely want to, within the next few years, be in a position to introduce them directly to donors. They get the funding directly, and if we do have a role, it's much more as a kind of technical advisor type, backstop should things not work out as they want to, whatever the issues are, but really as a supporter, not to always be that go-between. Because I think in good intermediaries won't always want to be that go-between. It's depending on the donor, there's quite a lot of bureaucracy involved when you're in that position. We don't want to always be there. We want a much more direct connection between organizations on the ground and the donors. And yeah, it's just about finding pathways to making that happen. Some of it's about visibility of the organization, making sure that they've got good comms, a good organizational strategy, their work is visible publicly to donors. That's a recurring theme, I think, amongst some of the very small organizations we fund. They do amazing work, but for whatever reasons, and a lot of it's due to language, they just do not have very good visibility to donors that are outside, in this case, Indonesia or Southeast Asia. And we do quite a lot of work, or we are about to do quite a lot of work in helping them gain traction, gain that visibility with the donor community.
Thank you, Daniel. That's really practical and concrete examples, and it's also like written in the guideline as well. Thank you for sharing. This is like another questions from the audience, and since Dinar, you mentioned about accountability, this one is about accountability, and I think it's good for 3 of you. So the question is, how can we redefine accountability as something that strengthens trust and shared purpose, recognizing that being relational does not mean being without accountability? Who want to take this one first? So I guess, yeah, please, Malika. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that this one is a very important one. For me, accountability is for sure a very important topic on all sides, and it requires the capacity to have, I come back maybe to my initial point, but to have like honest and sometimes difficult conversations. It requires to have self-accountability and not only show accountability to others, which also means being able to say when, as a donor, we are not sure of of how we are behaving, we are not sure of is this the best way forward, or just being also vulnerable to kind of, we hold power. We like, if we take it very seriously, we could be like, we know everything, we are in control and so on. And I guess that for accountability to happen, we need to let go a little bit of that on all sides, but especially I guess on the donor side. That said, I think that still there's like accountability for impact, for like practices that are equitable, like, just this needs to happen, and how it happens is something, it's a conversation that can happen. How, you know, at the initial stage of a partnership, how will we, you know, what's a good way for us to stay accountable to whatever we are agreeing? And the classical way can be through reporting, but we can find creative ways also to do that. And I think if it's a conversation, it can be interesting. I think that trust doesn't, so trust is maybe on the opposite of control, but trust and accountability is not on, or maybe not, like there's one side of control that is maybe against or like on the opposite of trust and accountability, and there's one side of control that goes for accountability. So I don't see it like something opposite. I'm getting a bit confused with what I'm saying. I'm just saying that basically you can be accountable and still be vulnerable and not know everything and like be in a trustful relationship. It's just about being able to speak out things. And yeah, control is also a way of learning. It's also a way, if there's no fear of like losing the partnership and so on. So I guess it's the culture of partnership that makes the difference too.
Thank you, Malika. I can see that you highlight also on the equality as well, right? Like you can be accountable, like you can talk about accountability, but it's not necessarily in opposite with trust findings and yeah, equality. Cool. Dinar or Daniel. Dinar first, probably you already open your microphone. Please, if you want to answer this question.
Yeah, I think I also agree with Malika point about the accountability, but a lot also donors not really trust that not only local NGO, but also with the indigenous community and local community not having their like the accountability or the capability to become accountable because they cannot like using they cannot manage their money because they are very young organization like Daniel said, but I think if you want to support directly to indigenous community or local communities, you have to you have to know that our in Indonesia, like the villagers or the village government in Indonesia, get lots of fund from our government in 1 million rupiah for their like development program in every village in Indonesia. So our village government can manage that lots of money, and our communities like indigenous people and local community also have experience working directly to the market, like like the coffee market or the commodity, lots of commodity market can directly um, um, touch our have the coordination and working directly with our community as well. So the I think the accountability it's more like between NGO and donors. Yeah, I mean it's more like the open. I mean like you have to have one panel to discuss about what you want to see together as a partner. So if you want to work directly with the community, we have to discuss and make sure that we have like STEM vision, and then working with lots of agreement and principle value about how we want to working together and reach the goals together. That's maybe that's the accountability that from our side. But I also want to mention about the intermediaries that we working this few years with Daniel. So not the intermediaries actually not really not always bad for for you to know. And in my experience, we have a lot of typical of intermediary. Can I show my presentation like 1 2 slides to
Yes,
show the
sure.
Daniel? Okay. So Daniel, so in my experience, we have like 4 type of collaboration that we has engaged with several parties. So the one is the ones who help us to access donor who are very hard to reach, like the administration, and we also don't have the capabilities to write the whole and big proposal. So they are the connect hub between us to the 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 true donor, yeah. So they are really help us in administrative, and also they are very democratic and respectful for our value based on common needs and goals. They also oriented towards scaling impact, not number of outputs. And the second intermediaries is those who have secure funding along with targets and expected output, but do not yet have the partner to achieve their goals, like I mentioned before to Malika. And then the third is who support our work with very little money and only do the technical work, but also have the ambition to become implementators who are ready to replace our work. So I think it's according to our participant question about how if the intermediaries also want to be implementators like local NGO in the front line. So we say that we see that they are a bit dangerous because they tend to claim our work of to become implementators. And the last one is government, like I mentioned before. So that's our experience working lots with lots of intermediaries in Indonesia.
Thank you for sharing, Dinar. Daniel, do you have like any comment on that or on the questions on accountability?
On what Dina just shared, yeah, very very interesting to get more insight into how you've identified these different types of intermediary. And yes, the fake intermediary is definitely the most dangerous. The one that wants to secretly be an implementer. I've seen that happen in many countries, and yeah, it's disastrous for local CSOs often. In response to the question, of course, a lot of it's about creating space for those conversations to happen. I think sometimes we're all overworked or very busy, and there's a tendency, I think, sometimes to give the money out and then wait for the report to come in. If you just operate like that, then you're never going to create the space for these conversations to happen, where there might be more of a discussion around mutual learning or accountability. And I think shared purpose is a very important one, because of course it links much more into the desire to have an impact. And certainly from ASAT's perspective, we are supporting organizations that we think or want or could do in the future have an impact on species conservation. So we are still making some decisions through that lens. Of course, we are, as part of that, developing these kind of trust-based relationships and ensuring there's flexibility in how they work with us and reporting requirements and all the rest of it. But fundamentally at the top is this desire that we both, us and the organization we support, want to see some level of impact on species conservation. So we never lose sight of that, and that's always there. Whether it sits atop the need to have trust-based relationships or not, I don't know, but it's certainly part of that sort of ecosystem as to how we work with organizations.
Thank you, Daniel. That's really interesting, and I think that's also like resonates with what Malika mentioned as well before, and with Dinar too. Yeah, like creating space for everyone to talk and discuss about accountability. But yeah, I think this is another questions also, but we are going back to the power dynamics topic. So agree that power dynamics or imbalances causes this. This is the elephant in the room, and both sides need to transparently address this. And then the question is, any practical examples on donor donors and CSOs and intermediaries, of course, to discuss, redefine, and agree on what power means and its implications. So I think like tonight, we are redefining and rewriting the narratives a lot. So any discussions before on how to redefine power, what power means between CSOs, donors, and intermediaries? I don't know who I want to call, but I feel like I need to call someone to get this running. Maybe Daniel, you can start first.
I did sort of hope you wouldn't pick on me. Well, I think this webinar is, of course, part of this process, and I think that historically, at least in my experience, in some other countries other than Indonesia, where most of my experience has been, these haven't really been discussed, and it's only, I'd say, well, at least in my experience within the last few years, that people are starting to advocate for different practices. Both donors and intermediaries and CSOs are asking for this as well. So there is a sense of a bit of a movement now. How to transparently address it? I think it's being in a situation, a space that's safe enough for those dynamics to be addressed very explicitly. I think that's possibly the only way. For example, as ASAP has done in terms of how it's designed and implemented its organizational development program, we know that there is a certain power that comes from us as the funders of the work, as the intermediaries providing grants to some of the organizations we're supporting. So we need to physically take ourselves out of that space. I think there are often very practical things that people can do in regards to addressing this dynamic. And I think for many people or many organizations that operate in conservation, it is, of course, recognizing and being very self-aware that whenever you walk into a room, you come with a certain power, and you need to try and, depending on the situation, you try and mitigate that as best as possible.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel.
Maybe if you don't mind, I can go next, because I would like to include a question to Dinar in what I so then she can go next. But I think it's a great question. I can give hints into two things that came to my mind, but then I also want to say that I realize we don't that often kind of start the conversation saying, we know it's there, how do you think it's the best way to address it, like what would be useful, and so on. So my question to Dinar would be, do you think this is something that would be interesting, or you know, how would that land? And there's of course not one reaction to it, but I would be curious of your point of view. And otherwise, two things that we are actually doing to address it is, one, most of our funding is unrestricted. So we see that also as a very concrete way of giving the power to the organization, because then she's the one knowing how to spend that money and like what to spend it on and so on. And even when it's programmatic, it's quite flexible. So we would always answer to, you know, organizations writing to us, can we change that line or that line of budget? Like, you are the one that, so really giving the power back. Now, the reality is this is a gray area, because the power of decision is on our board. The power of many things remains on our board. So there's kind of a bit of a contradiction anyway that stays. And then, yeah, I guess with our attitude, we try to live up to this wish to have a bit more of a power balance, meaning, you know, asking more questions than kind of speaking, or just being also very having an inquiry, I'm not sure how you say that in English, but inquiry approach, or trying modeling it in our position. But the reality is the power is still there, and I think that saying that we are blind to power, or that we do everything and it doesn't exist anymore, will never happen while the system is what it is. So I guess it's what can be done in the meantime.
But I think
Thank you,
can you
Malika. Yeah, Dinar.
can you repeat the Malika question to me about?
Yeah, a very practical one, but I was just curious of what you think, and it would go to Daniel too, but of if a donor would enter the meeting with you and ask you quite straightforward, we know there's a power imbalance, like how would you like us to address it in our relationship and in our partnership? I would just be curious of how would that
Oh, okay.
land with you, and yeah.
Yeah. So because I'm very honest person, so I always talk and speak very frankly to others. So honesty, I mean, like if you have like the channel of the communication, if donor have like the um direct communication with beneficiaries like us, like our community, it's really important to not only talking about the progress of the project, but also to get to know each other. I mean, we really don't know what, so like the intermediaries, we don't understand what the donors they want to see with this system, hierarchical system, yeah, because we only see what um the middle of hierarchy want to see, um not like totally, connection between donors, intermediary, and with the community itself. So if you want to become more clear to everyone that you support, not only us but also intermediaries, so you have to open your like communication link between three of us, not 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 just open for us, because it's mean you don't trust your intermediaries, but open the all the discussion among intermediaries, and also like local NGO and our community itself. Because if you ask me about the true meaningful participation, it have to all the part of this ecosystem have to open their mind and their voice to talk to everyone, that this ecosystem looking for one good reason and one good goals. So I think that's my question, and I also agree what your answer about the power dynamics. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Dinar. Actually, there's still a lot of questions, but we only have like 2 minutes left. So yeah, I think we need like the whole day and night for this discussion. Yeah, for the participants here, for everyone, thank you so much for your questions. They're super thoughtful. So each questions requires thoughtful answers as well. So the speakers cannot answer them quickly. We are sorry if we do not get to them all here. We will try to answer them, and then we can send them back to you with the recording from tonight. So yeah, we just have 2 minutes. Thank you so much, Dinar, Malika, and Daniel. Thank you for this is like a really great discussions. I don't know. I really want you to make like a closing statement, but probably quickly, probably quickly before I give it back to Alia. So maybe like 1 minute for three of you. uh, please, probably Dinar first, because this is like in my screen. Dinar, Malika, and Daniel.
Actually, I don't have the closing statement to prepare, but
That's okay.
if you, I want you to know that please, I mean, you have to know that whoever you are, if you already support the indigenous people movement, you are part of this ecosystem. So you have to also believe that ecosystem can work well if you also have like a good practice and good value to create these goals together with us. So um, um, don't hesitate to support indigenous and local community or local NGO in everywhere. So yeah, that's
Yeah, thank you.
the
Thank you,
conclusion.
Malika and Daniel. 30 seconds.
No, I just say thanks everybody. I think that statement was perfect for me.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Please, Daniel.
Yeah, in the interest of time, yeah, thank you for inviting me. I think it's been a really good discussion. I think we need more of this. Essentially, we need more bringing intermediaries, CSOs, and donors together in an open space where all this can be discussed in a very friendly way. So I'm very proud to be a part of this. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel, Malika, Dinar. Thank you, and thank you for everyone here. I'll give it back to Alia. Over to you, Al.
Thank you, Mbak Rati. Wow, what a rich and inspiring conversation that was. Let's give a big virtual round of applause to our moderator, Mbak Rati, and our wonderful speakers, Kak Dinar, Daniel, Malika, and Mark. Thank you again for being thoughtful, for your honesty, for your reflection, and your generosity in sharing both the struggles and the bright spots in this journey toward more equitable funding. If there's one thing we're taking away today is that moving from transactional to relational is not just about how the funds flow. It's also about how trust flow. It's about relationship that are human, flexible, and grounded in shared goals. It's how we use empathy, right? And not just shared love frame. You can also read the report as we shared the link in the chat box. So I'm not going to talk a lot. On behalf of Menjadi, Planet Indonesia, and Saraswati, thank you so much for being part of this conversation, for this space. Thank you for your enthusiasm, your feedback, questions. Those are amazing questions and insights you shared. Let's keep this conversation going, not in just webinars like this, but in how we build partnership, fun ideas, and support communities every day. Thank you once again, everyone. I hope we can meet again in another discussion space. Have a wonderful day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in this world. Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.